Well, we're going to talk about Spartan Athletics on this episode of MSU Today, but from the perspective of two MSU alumni who are journalists who cover Spartan Athletics for Michigan's leading newspaper. Chris Solari does so for the Detroit Free Press, and Matt Charboneau for the Detroit News. Thanks you both for coming in today.
Thanks, Russ. I appreciate it, and I'm sure Matt appreciates it too.
Well, hey, look, anytime I get stuck in a room with this guy,
fireworks can fly.
Yeah. Well, summer, normally I get a break from him, but here we are.
That's right. Well, Matt, I'll start with you. Just sort of, what's your background from the time you did graduate from MSU to now where you're covering MSU for the news?
So you go with the older guy first, right?
Yeah.
Well, I graduated from Michigan State. I know there's maybe some people on social media who think otherwise. 95. Chris and I overlapped, but here's the funny thing. Chris, so I was here in 91 and 95. When were you here?
93 to 99.
Okay.
Boy, he took the long route.
Hey, I'm telling you, the state news slowed me down.
Well, there's some other people like that. But the funny thing is I didn't know Chris at all when I was here. That's several people, actually, because I wasn't in the cool state news club. Anyway, it's a whole nother story. No, so I graduated in 95 from here. I was originally going to be an English teacher and coach high school baseball, so I've told Jake Boss he's leading my alternate life.
That's amazing to me because, first of all, you barely have a grasp of the English language, and I've seen you play softball.
See, so if anyone wants a glimpse of what it's like daily with us, there you go. So, no, I've told Jake he's living my alternate life, but somewhere in there, I had a friend who was in journalism and said, hey, you should come to this job fair thing, and a week later, I'm working at the Lansing State Journal, answering phones in the sports department and covering high school games, and it pretty much it never changed from there. And I've been at the news now since 06. So started as an editor there, and then in 2010 took over the Michigan State beat. I mean, I was other places prior to that, obviously, Oakland Press, Flint Journal, places like that. Always in Michigan.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course my time at the Lansing State Journal. Can't forget that. Way back in the day. So yeah, I mean, 13 years been covering this Michigan State, obviously, and let's see, it's 2016 for you, so only the last 7-ish years have been the real difficult ones.
I mean, to be fair, I've been back since 06 in Lansing.
Well, that's true. He's been let me put it this way. In terms of being around every day. Yeah, no, obviously I've known Chris longer than since 2016, but
well, Chris, what about you? So when did you come, and what's your background?
93 to 99. I was here a long, long time, but a lot of it was, as I mentioned, I was on the state news staff from my second semester in early 1994. Got to cover football for Nick Saban's first year, and went to become sports editor and then editor-in-chief of the state news in 1997. We won a few pacemakers during that time, which is the national award for top college newspaper. From there, I followed that same path to the Lansing State Journal, did the phones, did some MSU stuff there, high school games. And unlike Matt, I took the circuitous route back here in that my first job was in Strasburg, Virginia, working at a small paper there with another former classmate and state news guy, Dave Burkett, who covers the Detroit Lions for us at the Free Press. We worked there as kind of almost like a two-man team for about 6 months, 4 of which without an editor. But he covered Virginia football, I covered Virginia Tech, and I drew the good straw because I got to cover Michael Vick's first year and the Virginia Tech run to the national championship game that year, then bounced to another paper in suburban D.C. for a little bit, covered some Redskins, also covered the Lions, one of their last playoff games against the Redskins back in, I think it was either late 99 or early 2000. And then from there, bounced back here for a little bit to Lansing, and then out to South Dakota at the Sioux Falls Argus-Leader with a couple other MSU alums there. Shout out to Stu Whitney, who was really kind of one of my big mentors there. He wrote a really incredible book on the MSU football program under George Perlis when he was finishing up his student here, but he's been out in South Dakota for a while. And I was there, covered South Dakota State, then moved to Division I, and then came back to Lansing in 2006. was at the Lansing State Journal for 10 years, then took over for another State News alum, Joe Rexroad, at the Free Press in 2016. And
Never heard of him. Never heard of him.
Yeah.
Hold on, by the way, one of the I think the last Lions playoff game, I actually did. Was it the 16 or the whatever year they were in Dallas and got robbed?
Oh yeah,
14
that's
or
right.
15.
Yeah, right
yeah.
in there.
Because Michigan State was going to the Cotton Bowl every stinking year.
And you
back
stayed
then,
there
and
for
I
about
just
2
think-
weeks, I think, from what I remember.
It was a long time. But I just want to point out real quick, when I came back to when I took over the Michigan State beat, the football team finally, won a share of the Big Ten for the first time in 25 years. So I like to think I brought that with me.
Yes, and my first year was the 2016 season where they went 3-9.
So let's be clear who's more important. I will ignore the fact that the basketball team was preseason number 2 and barely made the NCAA tournament and lost in the first round. But whatever. It's all about football, right?
That's quite all right. Well, Chris, let me stay with you in sort of a two-part question. So why did you choose MSU to go to college, and sort of how did your time here impact you and help your career?
Well, it starts, and this is something that Matt kind of, as he alluded to, fell into it. This is something I've kind of wanted to do since I was about 12 years old. I grew up reading Sports Illustrated. Grew up reading, every sports page imaginable. I'm from the Pittsburgh area, so, I like the joke that the Steelers didn't win a Super Bowl until I was born, which is true. They won the first one right after I was born, and so I know nothing but Steelers success in my lifetime. But in doing so, right around that time when I was 12, I watched All the President's Men for the first time. And just really captivated me on the journalism side.
Wait, how old were you when you watched All the
About
President's
12.
For some reason, I'm laughing at the visual of 12-year-old Chris watching All the President's
Well,
Men.
it totally tangentially, I was involved in a number of academic games, but the one that I thrived in the most was Mr. President.
Boy.
So I had a lot of knowledge at that point about the Watergate scandals, but that gave you more of the other side of it, the journalism of how it came to be, and it was enthralling. And as I went into junior high, I can remember the first story I wrote for my junior high newspaper was about the smell of burning leaves filling the crisp autumn air.
Oh my goodness!
And
well,
about,
that doesn't
about
draw
the
you in.
junior
I
high
don't know what
football
does.
team.
Come on.
I mean, there's a little hand-drawn graphic there of the goalpost that someone did, but that's kind of the path that I took, and I worked for my high school paper. I worked for our local paper, and then there were a number of MSU alums that have come from my hometown, even though it's small. But probably two of the more notable were the Saul brothers, Rich and Ron, who were all Americans here. My baseball coach was a gymnast here on the men's team, and they had a number of Jim Kersey, who was an All-American gymnast in the mid-'60s, also from our high school. So we had a good connection with Michigan State. And as I investigated journalism programs, one of the big things that was important to me was the accredited programs. And Michigan State's program was, we used to get the booklet from Dow Jones that would tell you a lot about which programs were best, which programs had strong newspaper programs. And the State News and Michigan State's journalism program at that time was up at the top, with Northwestern's and Missouri and Syracuse. It struck me, and I had visited the campus probably in 1986 when I was probably about that same age, around 12, 13 years old, and fell in love with the campus. It reminded me from where I grew up, a larger version of Slippery Rock, if that makes sense. Even though the school down the road likes to claim Slippery Rock, we were.
Did you really just say school down the road? Yeah. You can say Michigan.
I can say Michigan.
It's allowed.
Hey, Michigan might.
I mean, I know we're on a Michigan State.
But you know what?
Building here,
but you know what? The colors are the same, green and white, which is interesting too.
All right.
But that's really kind of the circuitous way, and then knowing and investigating that. Oh, hey, this place has the largest college newspaper in the country. That meant something, and it really, throughout my career, being the editor-in-chief of the State News is something that, not many people get to do. And at that level and that time of my life and at that time of where the newspaper industry was, it meant a lot.
It never comes up at all ever now.
It's not quite. We're not quite as bad as like the Northwestern folks.
Well, that's true.
I mean, it's not like the first or second thing we're going to tell you. It might be the fifth or sixth.
It's going to come up eventually.
Well, Matt, what about you? Why did you choose MSU?
Nothing like Chris's. I hadn't. Now, well, I will say I grew up reading the paper because I was into sports. So I sat there and ate my cereal and read. For me, I read the Detroit Free Press and the Oakland Press because that's what came to our house.
Ah, I see you didn't read the Detroit News.
It took my parents a while. I was working at the news for like 5 years before they switched to the news. I remember reading Mike Downey was the columnist when I was growing up, and then he left to go to L.A. and some whippersnapper named Mitch Albom showed up. I'm
Hey,
like, who's this
side
guy?
note for you.
Yeah?
Did you read Jay Mariotti when he was in Detroit?
No.
Little known fact.
How old?
Jay's parents are from Butler, and my cousin set them up.
Just so you know, Chris
So
is from
that's-
Butler. That also
yes.
comes up.
Yeah, that's about
Fairly
the second or
often.
third thing you learn.
Yes. So no, I mean, I was obviously reading newspapers. I wasn't, I didn't have this dream of being a newspaper guy. I thought I was going to be in the papers, like most kids. But if we're going to name, okay, who are the famous Spartans from one? So like Kirk Gibson, I think people have heard of him.
Yep.
Yeah, Gibby's a Waterford Kettering alum.
Oh, the football player.
Yeah, well, he was also a baseball player. Jim Miller, who also played both. I tell people all the time, Jim Miller, how long he was in the NFL, 13 years or whatever. That's the gig to get, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, he was a starter for like a year or so, but he got a ring. I tell people all the time he was a better baseball player than a football player when we were growing up, but he loved playing football, so I mean, I think it worked out all right for him.
Yeah.
No, I was coming, like I said, I was coming to Michigan State because I was going to be a teacher. I was going to be an English teacher, coach sports, whatever, and Michigan State also has a good education program as well. But I can't say there wasn't I didn't do this big in-depth research. I mean, my sisters went here. I was kind of like, yeah, let's go to Michigan State. And same thing. I mean, the place is beautiful.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to be the process back then as it is now.
No.
For as much.
Not for me, it wasn't.
You're right.
Then, but again, it was, and it's not like I took a big leap from English to journalism. But it really was. It really was when I went to a job fair and then I met Bob Gross of the Lansing State Journal. Just talked about what they do, and I'm like, this is. I mean, I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't think of anything of the things I like to do. Like, it's all coming together. Like,
Yeah.
I like to write. I love sports. Like, what's not to love about this? And a week later, I'm in there answering phones, and so I wasn't the journalism kid at 12. You're in a newsroom for a couple days, and you're hooked. I mean, that's there. You're like, well, this is clearly what I'm doing. There was no doubt at that point. So that's how I ended up here. It wasn't. It's not as probably as poetic or romantic as Chris is when he was 12 years old,
but you get you give the in-state perspective where I came
Sure.
from out of state and kind of see it from a little different bent.
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up, everybody, I'm like anybody else in this state. You're either Michigan fans or Michigan State fans, and so it's always been a part of my life.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I was, hey, I'm going to go explore this school or that school, and it wasn't, something that was a part of me. I mean, it's always been a part of me. And, it was mostly about, like for most people, it's about sports.
Yeah.
Which team are you rooting for?
Right.
And, obviously in our house, we rooted for the proper team in green and white for the most part. I think my dad really started rooting for once because both my sisters went here as well. Once all his money started going to Michigan State, he's like, yeah, I'm going to wear green and white. So
Is it hard to, I mean, you've got to be Spartan fans at some point. Is it easy to set that aside, and is it almost hard to root for them now when you're not working because you've set that aside so, conscientiously?
Yeah, that it can be difficult, but and again, I come from a little different place than Matt with this, mostly because I for a long time have just solely reserved my passion for the Steelers for my lone outlet for fandom, and it becomes. I know this is hard to believe. It becomes irrational at times.
that's shocking.
So
I say.
So when you kind of grow up in that pro sports environment like Pittsburgh had, even though you were in Detroit, I mean, Penn State was 3 hours away. Pitt was good, so we kind of followed Pitt. My uncle was a big Notre Dame fan because Terry Hanratty, again, was from our hometown. So there were a lot of different college aspects that were at play in my world. So you kind of you didn't. I didn't really get invested as much in college sports until I got to cover it. It was more of a broader overview.
Interesting, yeah. Did you ever have any trouble separating that? I mean, you're a professional. You can do it, but
yeah, I don't feel like I've had trouble in that sense. And I've said this before. The bad thing about our job is it takes the sports fan out of you.
Yeah. That's why I keep that one.
Right, and it doesn't always work. I used to tell my bosses, don't send me to any Tigers games. Don't have me feel, because I wanted to have one. I want to be able to go to the ballpark, have a beer, yelling up, and not feel like someone's. It hasn't always worked out. I've already had to do some Tigers games this year, but it honestly, it takes the fan out of you because you look at everything differently. You look at things objectively, and those sort of things, and it's not exactly always what fans want to hear. But I've always, the thing for me that I've always struggled with in terms of, I don't feel like I'm rooting for Michigan State as I'm at work, but you get to know people.
Yeah. And
I think this is just normal. Whether it's a player you've gotten to know over 4 or 5 years, or coaches, and then you want good things for them, right?
Yeah.
And you see a guy. I remember I was 2 years in on the beat, and Michigan State lost. They lost that first Big Ten championship game, and I remember feeling bad for some of the guys that you got to know and knew what they and how much that meant, and they didn't get it. So you start feeling bad for those, or you pull for those guys.
Yeah, that makes sense
in that sense. So it's not so much, hey, go green. It's like, I want these guys. I know these guys work hard, and this is a big deal to them.
Cassius Winston's a great example of that. I mean, a kid who, I covered his commitment ceremony at UAD Jesuit, so you get to know him, get to know his family at the very, and I don't want to say the first stages, because they built him to that point where he committed, but before he even gets on campus, you start to get to know these people a little bit more on a personal side, rather than just transactional of here's what you did tonight, here's what you got coming up, and you kind of get their backstory a little bit, and you see who they are, and that it is. I mean, I think that goes in our industry across the board. I mean,
the problem is when people aren't able to put that aside if there's bad things to write.
Right.
Like, I've known some people that I think are really good people that screwed up, but we can't. I can't say, well, I'm not going to write this because I think he's an okay guy who made a mistake. It's still
news.
Yeah. So
it's the argument that you hear with the Baseball Hall of Fame voting for the Baseball Writers of America, is that people for many years would take personal vendettas against guys, even like Ted Williams, and they wouldn't vote them in because they had a grudge.
Because they weren't nice to him.
Yeah.
But it's, I could go on and on guys over the years where I'm like, that guy was a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change
what you have to do.
It doesn't change what they were able to do on a field or a court or off it for some guys. It's just is what it is. But you get more of a connection with the people as opposed to the institution or a team. Because I've guys that cover Pro Beach are the same way. It's not so much about I want the Tigers to do well, but man, this guy's worked hard and been through a lot. And
I think particularly we've dealt over the last decade or inside a decade of some bad things that have happened here. And I think and how I've always tried to approach it, and I don't know how you feel, Matt, but being an alum and having come through here and having the background that the journalism program provided us, you want to make sure you're doing things the right way. You want your alma mater to be doing things the right way, and you want to hold them maybe sometimes to a higher standard. Yeah. And I think that sometimes gets conflicted when people say, oh, they're against them. No, it's entirely the opposite. You want things to be done above the board and in the best possible manner for the university that you spent a lot of money at.
Yeah. I would say I would never, if I could go through and not write one bad story for a whole year, I'd take it every year. I mean, I started out, like I said, I started in 2010 on this beat.
Yeah.
Things were great for about 4 or 5 years. And I remember there was a lot of stuff going on at Michigan. The Michigan beat writers would always be like, God, you guys got it, mate. They were always writing something, a coach this and whatever. And at Michigan State for that time frame, everything was smooth sailing.
And then I jumped on the beat in 2016.
And then it really wasn't, So it's like but those times I don't want to do those things, but we're not writing a PR pamphlet.
Right.
You know, that's not what our role is. That's not what our job is. And you have to do those things just as well as you do all the good things.
Yeah.
Because then I don't think you have any credibility. Some people might be mad at you. There's plenty of people mad at us. I don't know why they're mad at us. We didn't. But still, you have to do it the same way you would if you're writing about a national championship. You have to be just as professional and thorough and everything about all the other stuff we know has gone on.
And because our industry has become a lot younger, a lot faster than some people would realize.
These new people, I don't think, follow things.
Yeah.
They're not as concerned about being thorough and professional in everything.
Well, along with so with all the younger audiences and I guess journalists that have come up, a lot in the last 10 to 15 years in our industry, there's been a big purge of institutional knowledge. And, where we came into the business and there would be guys in their late 60s, early 70s who spent their lifetime, know the ins and outs, know every politician, every athletic director, every coach at every high school, at every level. Our industry has lost a lot of that. So Matt and I, because we overlap the past in Michigan State where it wasn't so rosy. When Matt started here in the 90s, there was the DiBiagio and Perlis situation, and then there was the Judd Heathcote situation when I came into college, and then Tom Izzo took over, and he went through his thing in the first couple of years. So having that historical base and knowledge, while some people might want to just glom on to the last 10 years, you have to know the institution's history, and it's now somewhat distant past, but when you've lived it and you've kind of covered it, it's still there and it still resonates.
Yeah. Talking with Matt Charboneau of the Detroit News, Chris Solari of the Detroit Free Press, and you've kind of led me into the next topic, just sort of this crazy world of journalism, but sports journalism. How has it changed most over the years, and where is it headed?
I've thought we've talked about this too, like in our careers, to see how much change there's been from the time we started to now. I mean, when I was first in school, for sure, I remember vaguely hearing about this odd thing called the World Wide Web. And by the time I left school, I think I got an email. This is 95, and at that point, I've learned since then, the Detroit News was one of the first papers to have a website, and it was in 95. They were like the third paper to have a website.
We went online.
So we didn't
News in 96.
Right. So you didn't. So when we started, we were still in the world of, you have a deadline at night. It's going to come out in the paper in the morning. Maybe the TV guy scooped you for the 11 o'clock news, and that was about it, right? And in that time frame, we've gone the changes, and I guess I don't want to say innovation. Some things are great, some things are not so great, but it has changed so dramatically or substantially in the sense that the idea of writing for tomorrow doesn't exist anymore. Everything is immediate, and I think, kind of going with what Chris said a little bit, in that quest to always be, right now, sometimes the real true journalism gets glossed over a little bit. Have you done everything you should? Have you really confirmed these things? And in my opinion, we've created all these other websites, fan sites, really that were born out of recruiting. And that's fine. I think there's absolutely a role to cover recruiting and be all that. But what it has created is a fan journalism sort of thing, where you're only going to tell people how great everything is here, and we're going to ignore the fact that maybe there's something bad happening or negative. It don't always have to be something as big as, Larry Nassar or something like that. I just mean maybe the team isn't quite as good as you said, or those sort of things. That's all kind of getting pushed aside to where now people believe Chris and I, or say the guys at MLive, we should be doing the same thing. And I'm going to say Spartan Mag or whatever, and it's not because I'm being critical of Jim or any of those guys. I'm just, it's an
They've
example.
been around the longest.
Wait, no, how come they're telling me this and you're saying this? You guys aren't, we're bad at it because we're not just supporting the team, I guess is the best phrase. You didn't used to see that when we first started. To see that to where it is now, it's kind of surprising, but people lump all of us in as the quote-unquote media. Whereas Chris and I and MLive and Graham at the Lansing Journal, we're doing traditional journalism. We're doing journalism. Those guys are doing something different. And again, that's fine. I think there's a role for it, and people eat up recruiting and all that stuff, and that's great. But people need to understand we're not doing the same job. There's sometimes we write the same stories, but we're really not doing the same job, and that has been the biggest change. Really, I mean, obviously the way you consume news, you don't read a paper anymore, but that's changed. But that for us, I think, is the biggest thing that shifted.
And I think, in talking what you were saying about right now versus being right, which I think is kind of something that goes along with that. Some of that on our end, I think when I mentioned about losing institutional knowledge in the editor chairs and really losing the volume of people that we had that used to look at things, that's gone by the wayside. Yeah. There used to be set deadlines so you could look at the paper at the end of the night and make sure one last atrocity check. I mean, who knows what a paper is, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're at this point, too. So you have fewer eyes looking at things, fewer people that are kind of giving a critical historical perspective, saying, hey, you might want to think about this, that, or the other thing. But you also have, I think, with that immediacy, it's changed what it really is, I think, because you see journalism playing out live. I mean, it's almost in some ways a live stream, which it hasn't, what you would get once a day, you'd spend 8, 10, 12 hours working on before that. Now you're seeing updates and updates and updates. Yeah. So that's kind of been a big difference. But I'll tell you, the one time that I mentioned, we went online at the State News in the summer of 1996. And it was a big deal because we were one of the first college papers to go online. And the story, I won't mention anyone's name to protect the not so innocent.
I want Joe Rexroad to be part of this story. I don't know if he is, but I want him.
He had actually not even started there. But there was we'll say a senior editor who was celebrating their 21st birthday in the middle of the summer, and the Olympic Park bombing happened in Atlanta. And being journalists, when you've been celebrating someone's birthday, it sobers you out pretty quickly, and it's time to get moving. We got to do this. Luckily, I was actually sick that day from the Big Ten media days. I must have had something bad to eat there.
Sure.
We're going to say.
Never.
But I didn't drink, so I ended up carting everybody around back to the State News office when we were in Student Services building, and we were trying to figure out how can we localize this. Well, a few days earlier, we had a picture of a guy who was an MSU student at the time who was at the Olympics, and we had a front page picture of him painted. He painted himself red, white, and blue at the Olympics. We won't mention any names again, but we thought, well, we know that this person was there. Let's try and track down his family and see if we can get a hold of him. Mind you, this is about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we tracked down this person's parents, and they said, oh yeah, this person was blown off their feet by the blast. He was in Olympic Park, and he's okay, and very Forrest Gumpian, by the way. So we had the story. I think it was around 5 or 6 in the morning. There may have been some runs to the all-night McDonald's to get some food. We posted the story at statenews.com at about 6 in the morning, and all of us, after a long night, went to bed. Our phones started ringing about 7 or 8 in the morning from the AP in Detroit, a number of Detroit newspapers and media outlets trying to ask if they could use and quote us and cite the story. And that was kind of the moment where I realized things have changed, and we can actually now compete in the immediacy realm with television and radio, which we never could before that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's good and bad. There's good, like so many things. Right. I mean, I think, as I mentioned, the negatives of people kind of, skirting the edges a little bit and to get things quicker. Because my first story was in my first year on the football beat. I'm standing there listening to Mark D'Antonio he used to do like the Wednesday night or Thursday. He used to do like a Wednesday or Thursday night thing with us for like 10 minutes. And this was when Chris L. Rucker had gotten arrested and was, because he had been on probation from that fight before, and he got a DUI. Mm-hmm. So, and this team's 8-0 going to Iowa, and Chris L. Rucker, he broke probation. He's got to do his 2 days in the jail or whatever. And you're just figuring, okay, well, he's clearly not playing this week. And Mark D'Antonio tells us right there, yeah, he was released today and he was at practice. And so as I'm standing there, this is how we operate now. My phone's in one hand, I'm listening to him, and I'm typing. This was early Twitter days.
Yeah.
I'm typing with my left thumb that Mark like Chris Ulrich has been reinstated. And then I hear people afterwards saying, I broke the story. I'm like, I just typed faster with my thumb.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, to me, when I think broke the story, I'm like, you had something exclusive. And that's when I knew, to me, that was the moment of this is different than it used to be.
Yeah, Twitter was a whole different change than
now it's like if you just type faster, now suddenly you're a guy breaking. It's like, I don't know, you didn't really work hard for that, but okay.
And what about the health of the news and free press? I mean, it's been a while since they've been printing every day and home delivering, but isn't there much more interaction online, but fewer in the paper? Is that sort of where we are?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how everything is. I mean, we saw that at the Lansing State Journal from when I got back there in 2006 to when I left in 2016. And, you think back to when the newspapers were robust. In fact, I was in Saginaw on my way home on Father's Day and picked up a copy of the Saginaw News, which is an M Live product. And the woman at the counter said, I said, this is like, here's this produced on Thursday, because a lot of those big papers now are produced days in advance.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, it's not as big as it used to be. It's not as much stuff in there. And that's kind of where everybody's gone. I don't think that's not a news or free press or M Live issue. I mean, it gets around the country. I mean, unless you have a captive audience now, and there are, I mentioned about my hometown paper, they've done, basically their website has only been subscribers for as long as I've seen it. And if you subscribe to the print version, that's the only way you have access to some of the web stuff. So, people have been trying to figure out a way to put the genie back in the bottle in a lot of ways after letting the news go for so long, or our stories, our work. I don't know how or if we can do that, but you're right. It has shifted, and I think that's been a concerted shift from a lot of the newspaper companies to try and figure out ways to monetize what we've lost with ad revenue over the years in the print cycle.
Well, I think back, like I said, when you first went online in 96 and 95, back then it was just, people didn't know what to make of it. And it was just throw everything online. Well, if it's in the paper, throw it online. To where people have become conditioned. Yeah. How many times do we get a response on Twitter about something you post, you post a link to a story or whatever, I can't read it. It's behind a paywall. Well, you wouldn't have been able to read it in the paper if you didn't buy the paper either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But for years, that's how you clicked on something and read it. And now it's difficult to go back and say, hey, actually, I prefer not to give away our work for free. Most people don't.
Right.
But we did for years.
The irony is more people are reading these days because of the web, but yet now more and more jobs are being lost because we haven't been able to figure out a way as an industry to go from these tangible print advertisements and Sunday papers with chock full of advertisements to battling not just the fact that we've put things online, but the fact that all those companies that we have partnered with over the years as advertisers have their own websites and their own direct reach to the community.
And so much of it was local too. Things like you mentioned the Sunday paper, things like Craigslist
killed the classifieds.
It did.
Yeah.
That was a big knife in newspapers.
That was a huge one. The job, like Indeeds and all those things. Now, think about the Sunday paper. Before, you would have sections just for employment.
Yeah, right.
That stuff paid the bills. Local advertising paid the bills. Now we still have some ads, obviously, for big companies, big box stores, that sort of thing. But if you own like a local company, why would you advertise it? And you're certainly not going to advertise on online. Page. You're going to have your own page now because it doesn't help me to advertise on the News or Free Press and some guy in Tallahassee sees that I have a laundromat in Troy.
And the interesting thing is people think, well, journalism's dying.
Yeah,
journalism's not dying. It's the revenue stream that was behind it that allowed you to pay 35 cents for a newspaper. So when people say now, well, geez, why is my Sunday Saginaw News $5? That's why. It's because a lot of that has gone by the wayside. It does take money to do good, deep, investigative journalism and have the type of people who do have institutional knowledge on your staff. Otherwise, you do get regurgitated press releases. That's the difference.
Yeah.
You either pay for society, this being an important thing in society, or you don't. Someone's got to.
Yeah. Well,
That's a long way of saying, I don't know about the health of the future.
Right. It's kind of up in the air. But, Chris and Matt, let's change the topic to what you cover in general college athletics. Talk about change and evolution.
Even clearer answers on this, huh?
And, we'll get to ask you to talk about NIL and the transfer part. But in general, again, while you've been doing it, and it just seems like the last couple of years more tumultuous than ever, but what's going on with college athletics?
I'll just sum it up real quick. For our industry, we had that. I think Twitter came online somewhere in about 2009. Plus, we had, like in the mid-90s, was the web coming into play. It's been that seismic a shift since probably about 2020 for college athletics in a very, very condensed window.
Yeah.
I mean,
when you're talking, I feel like we started moving there with expansion, right? And that was slowly kind of building through the 2000s, 2010s, really, I think when the Big Ten, this was obviously Penn State way back when, but, when you got Nebraska in 11 and then 14 was, I think you were starting to see slowly that move, and then boom, with NIL, everything happening, the one-time transfer, all that stuff happening at the same time. You had all the lawsuits against the NCAA were coming down. It was all happening, and I feel like we're just in this space of nobody really knows what direction we're headed, and because it feels like the NCAA has kind of backed off and said, well, fine, if this is how you're going to do it, do it. Are we really getting to these power conferences? Are they really going to break off from the NCAA? I think there's still so much we don't know about where it's going, but Chris is right in the sense it's in this short period of time. It feels like college athletics has gotten flipped on its head, and you don't know. When you've got guys, signing a letter of intent one day, and 2 weeks later they're in the transfer portal, that, I would have never imagined we'd be in that position. If people want to make money, let them make money. I don't care. Some the cynics will say kids were getting paid anyway. Now it's allegedly above board.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. But
we'll see what the IRS says about that.
Yeah, there's so much, and I think it's still changing. Every year we have, now we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. You look at it now, and you're like, there's so little regulation over what's happening. You feel like it can't possibly keep going like this, right? Because to me, the idea of college sports is you get to know your team, know your players, and that's not the case anymore. These guys know I'm a big softball nut because my daughter plays, but Oklahoma just won the national title, and their sophomore pitcher wins the title. She's like All-American, and 2 days later says, I'm out. And you understand why. She's from Nebraska and wants to go back to Nebraska and all that, but you're like, when in the world would a sophomore star of the team that just won a national title a week later say, I'm transferring? That's just, think of Trevor Lawrence at Clemson.
Yeah.
Wins, and he's got another year and says, I'm going to go do it at, Alabama.
Yeah.
But that's happening now. That's becoming the norm. And I think that's hard to me, my idea of college sports is that's what is going to start eroding at it. That sort of stuff where you don't feel like you have any, I don't know the identity of this team. I don't know who these kids are, and it gets more expensive to go to games and all. I think that all's contributing to, I don't know, to me, college sports are in a precarious place right now.
Yeah. Is it television sports? That's kind of what I said. I want to stop calling it college sports and start calling it TV sports, because quite honestly, you've seen now the Big Ten. I believe there's other places that have gone and made their top executives no longer sports-based. They're now TV-based.
TV executives,
people.
Yeah.
And, the leadership in college sports has taken that path of sports and of television and entertainment, which is why you see a lot of crazy game times and crazy days and playing every day of the week to fill programming blocks. Well, that's inherently unfair in some ways to college athletes, right? But now when you start giving them money, whether it be from a name, image, likeness deal, a collective, whatever it is, colleges don't want to say it, but they're employees. It is pay for play. And I think there's a fatigue right now with the amount of changes in such a short window that has really staggered the fan bases in a lot of schools and disillusioned them. When guys will be on campus for a year or two and take off to the next venture for whatever reason it is. And I do think that one of the, and Tom Izzo likes to use the phrase unintended consequences. I think in this last cycle with the transfer portal, because these guys now and women now have agents representing them for name, image, likeness deals, they're not unionized, they don't have contracts, so the portal's being used as a negotiating tool. And that's something that I don't think anyone foresaw coming in the NCAA leadership that allowed it, particularly after adding the one-time transfer in there. I mean, but on the kids' side and on their agent side, if you're an agent worth your salt, you want to maximize your negotiations. So what do you have to negotiate? You and your ability. What do coaches say? Your best ability is availability.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you threaten to go in the portal, you're no longer available. So now your demand goes up. So there's a lot of course correcting that's going to be happening in the next. I mean, it's happened in the last 5 years, and it's probably going to be at least another 5 to 10 years before it smooths out. But it really right now is pay for play, and it's not, to me, it's not a sustainable model. Something's got to change, whether it be professional aspect and making college athletes paid employees, and then there's a whole other can of worms with benefits and all the costs that would come with that and who would pay them, or do you try and get them away from the NIL collectives? I don't know. I mean, I talked to my bosses about this, and I feel like even on our end, what do we cover? What's the important things to cover right now? Because in the pro realm, you can cover contract negotiations in the off season. You can do all this stuff. This is going on year round for college sports, and I feel bad for the guys like Tom Izzo and the coaches. And it's hard and funny to say when guys are making millions and millions of dollars, but they're making those millions of dollars based on a model that was stable. Now it's completely unstable, and every day you run the risk of losing your roster or your top player or players on your roster with no recourse to bring anyone back in because you don't have a free agency technically. So it's fascinating.
Well, the other thing with professional sports is you sign a contract.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I signed a guy to a 3-year contract. I'm not worried about it for 3 years.
Right.
Yep.
In college sports right now, you've got about a 5-minute contract, and I'm being sarcastic because there isn't one.
Well, I mean, Michigan State added a defensive back who he transferred to Miami in the off season.
Never played
there, went through spring practice, and now transferred to Michigan State.
Well, I mean, they had one last year with Ken Talley from Penn State. Went to preseason camp for 2 weeks, bailed, and transferred here. You never stop. And I've heard coaches, like, their schedules have been tough for years.
Sure.
But now you cannot afford to not be working every single day. And ask every one of these coaches, whether they're on the record or just talking, the toughest thing they're doing now is recruiting their own roster.
Yep.
You never stop recruiting a guy. He signed the letter of intent, used to be like, okay, we're good.
And like I've heard Tom tell you guys, what we don't hear about is the people who enter the portal that don't get another offer.
Yes.
And then what do they do? That's maybe more of them than...
And that's a disappointing thing a little bit what the NCAA's done. It used to be when they first started the portal, you could get access to this thing. If you knew a coach or whatever, oh, yeah, here's my... Now they've made it tougher. I don't understand why. To see the portal, who's in it, who's not, and then you would when it was first a thing, I'd look. I'm like, there's like 12,300 whatever football players in this thing. There's no way they all find a home. And Tom has always said that. You guys do that story, and it's a great idea. He's right. This is a good story. It's hard to find. First of all, you got to find anecdotal parts of it. Hey, I'm a kid who went in and ended up nowhere. We can find enough of those, but getting the real numbers of what percentage of kids in every sport go in the portal and end up nowhere, I feel like it's a lot higher number than people would guess. And that's the downside of this. And Tom talks about all the time. He says, what's best for the kids? He goes, if you're telling me right now that this setup is the best for them, then I'm in.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't think it is, but that's what would drive this whole thing. What's best for them? And it's not always just, hey, go wherever you want, get paid whatever you want. That's not always what's best. There might be a kid here and there that it's best for, but it's not for everybody.
And that lack of transparency also carries over into the name, image, likeness situation where guys are making money, but no one really knows how much.
Yeah.
No one knows if guys are making as much as they openly claim, or if they're making more than they openly claim, or even if they're making more off the books that isn't going to get taxed. I mean, that's part of the Wild West as well. I mean, where you know, and I do think though that, you know, the portal stuff, all this stuff ties together. Yeah. I mean, the portal stuff, the NIL, the transfer rules. I mean, in some ways, it's like a vortex where it's swirling downward.
Yeah. If one or the other didn't exist, if it was just the transfer rule was now a thing, but NIL didn't exist, it'd probably be fine. But now you're seeing guys jump in it because of NIL. You know, and
it just seems like there needs to be some guardrails at some point, and I don't know if you have some thoughts on what they should be, but because two things can be true. We can want the kids to get everything they deserve, but it does ruin your fandom a little bit when you don't know who's going to be on the team.
Unintended consequences.
And for some kids transferring, that is the best move. That's what Tom's saying. It's not his critics or people recruiting against him will say, you're just trying to keep guys. No, that's about, for a guy like Pierre Brooks, probably the best move was to transfer. Right, and there's been other guys down the road like that. This was the best move. Other guys probably hasn't been. You know, I can go back in basketball, just think of guys like Brandon Kearney back 10 years ago or whatever it was. What in the world was he transferring for? You know what I mean? So you see it just in Michigan State, just in one program, Michigan State. You see the examples of both. And obviously, Brandon was before the portal stuff.
But even you look at a guy like Keon Coleman, you know, if the rumors are out there that there was a better NIL package, right? So you can't fault a guy for that now, right?
Right. I mean, how are you supposed to now? But how are you supposed to say to that kid, no, don't do that. Stay here. Now, it might be better for his career long term, but it's tough to convince a 20-year-old dad or 21-year-old dad, and that's where.
Because that money, which some people would say isn't life changing, sometimes is.
Yeah.
Maybe for him it was, but that's what we're saying. Those things, if NIL doesn't exist, maybe Keon Coleman's still playing here right now. And again, some of this is speculation. I don't want to act like to tell people I know the whole story with Keon Coleman, but he's just one example. We're seeing it all the time. Like, what do you do to fix this? I'm not really sure. Yeah. that's my because
it's still almost in the
it's almost like
initial stages, right? Where it hasn't even shaken out.
Look at Hunter Dickinson. I mean, you're talking about a guy that has openly said on his podcast stuff that he's going to make multiple millions of dollars. He said that. We don't know that for certain.
And if he is, how do you tell him no?
Right.
And again, it's different for every circumstance. I mean, he's the kind of guy that we know in the NBA. That's not what the NBA is looking for right now. And if he can do this in college, why wouldn't he? And if he can't get it at Michigan, who are we to tell him not to go? And it's such a tough spot because I feel like then you think of a fan.
And the thing is, what
you're like, oh, well, this is no good because now I don't have my team stinks now, you know, or
and
I've
what
invested
college
in this
has promised kids, especially athletes, is a lifetime of education, right? You know, your education that you get in college is going to last with you for the entirety of your life. Yeah. The problem is their athletic life is a much shorter window.
Yeah.
And if you aren't cashing in now, you aren't cashing in at 40 years old or 48 years old like some of us.
I know where that's going.
Well, I feel for guys like Alan Haller trying to figure all this out. Does any of this have any particular challenges or opportunities for Spartan Athletics that you see, or just everybody's kind of facing the same things and trying to figure this all out?
Well, I think that my partner, Steve Berkowitz at USA Today, he did a piece on, he does his annual look at where the state of college athletics is, and I think Michigan State was 11th or 12th on his list in terms of revenue. So there's clear, and Michigan State, up until this last cycle, people thought was ahead of the curve in a lot of the things with name, image, and likeness. And I think that, but you've seen that with some of those schools that, like Miami, for instance. Miami was the one that was kind of the trailblazer in a lot of things. They lose some investors, really what it is now. They're not donors anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden you start hearing less and less about them. So there's going to be course correction. I mean, is it going to be the Ohio States, Alabamas, Michigans of the world continuing to rule based on historic status and all that? I don't know. I mean, but a school like Michigan State, by being ahead of it and trying to, in some ways, I think, shape it, that's a good thing. But it's hard to say how much that's even going to matter in 2 to 3 years with how wildly it's fluctuated now.
Yeah, because how are these kids getting paid? Who's paying them?
Right.
All those things. I mean, we just saw Matt Ishbia have to end his whole NIL deal because of buying the Suns.
When the Alston case came down, everyone the NCAA didn't act, and they had all this time to act. They said, okay, open up for the Wild, and the states themselves kind of took it upon themselves to basically write the NCAA out of the equation with a lot of the laws if you go and look at things. Mm-hmm. So the NCAA in a lot of ways has been rendered toothless by state governments. So what's going to be next? I mean, but nobody saw the name, image, and likeness. They thought, well, that's just going to be allowing them to go and do advertisements for local car dealerships and all these other things. What they didn't see is, in the unintended consequences, is the collectives, where donors are pulling millions of dollars together to basically bid on high school athletes and college transfers. And that's, Michigan State has a couple of those. Michigan has a couple of those. Most Power 5 schools have all these resources. But it's also out of the athletic department's purview. So I talked with new Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti a couple weeks ago, at his introductory press conference, and that was one of the things that he said is even the administrators have a lack of transparency on a lot of those things. So that's something that, until you can kind of get a better idea of how much money's flowing, all these things that are lacking guide rails, I don't know where you can say or how you can say Michigan State or any other school will be better or worse positioned in this.
Yeah, and what happens when a lot of these people I talk to think we're eventually going to move to some sort of revenue sharing, but you referenced it a little bit earlier. You start doing that, then you really are an employee.
Yeah, and then who's paying the benefits?
Yeah.
Who's paying the medical costs? Who's doing all the things that – who's going to give 401ks? Who's going to give all these different things that unintended consequences that if you look at a regular employer, what they provide for benefits to their employees would come to college athletics.
Yeah. Well,
back to the day when you thought you'd just get a college scholarship and go to school, right?
Yeah. How naive of us, right?
Yeah. Be a teacher and a coach.
So before I let you guys go, appreciate all this insight. If there's such a thing as an off season, just what are your kind of general thoughts of both the football and basketball seasons coming up?
Well, I mean, I think with basketball is the easy one. I mean, everyone is. I mean, clearly it's going to be a top 5 team preseason. But as I referenced in my history here, my first year covering the beat, they were a preseason number 2 coming off a back-to-back Final Fours. It was a no-brainer, right? And that season was a disaster. What I will say is different with this team. We'll see how the freshmen kind of integrate into everything, but I want to say Tom is those teams over the last, 8, 9, 10 years, the connectivity. Yeah, I was going to say that, but there's a much better atmosphere in the locker room these days. That I think back to that team I was referencing in 10-11. It just didn't exist. That was not there. There was a divide. You know how that goes in a locker room.
Coming off 2 Final Fours.
2 Final Fours. You're right, and it was not great. And that stuff matters. I mean, we've seen it in football locker rooms after they had their run in. You mentioned coming out at 16 when they're 3-9. Well, that locker room is a mess. Yeah. So it's not a real stretch there to see. Hey, there's a correlation. That's why I say, assuming the freshmen come in, and I'm going to assume that it's going to go pretty seamless. They've got a good locker room. They've got that togetherness. They've got the guys. They've got the guard play. This should be a team that they're going to be ranked high, and they're probably going to deliver on it. Now, what that means, are they going to win the national title? I don't know. Yeah. What I'm saying is they're going to be a factor all season long, barring crazy injuries or whatever, knock on wood.
Or someone else loading up on transfers to create a mega team like.
But I think at
Miami
this point
Heat.
we kind of know. I think right now we got a pretty good idea of what the Big Ten is going to look like and the top teams. So obviously the basketball team is in really good shape. The expectations clearly are high. So, I think people are fired up about that. Football,
I think people are waiting for basketball season.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's that.
No, I don't think so either. I think there's a lot of question marks. I mean, you lose your starting quarterback and top wide receiver. You've struggled in the run game last year. You've had a lot of inexperience on the offensive line. Your defense has been pretty porous, even when they did win 11 games. I mean, they had some struggles defensively, mighty struggles, and they haven't fixed them yet. So I think there's a lot of questions, and I think you also look at, you're talking about 3 years of Mel Tucker and not really knowing what his identity of his program is yet versus almost 30 years now of Tom Izzo,
right,
and pretty much knowing what you're going to get on a consistent basis. So I think it's going to be a fascinating football season.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be a good football season.
I will say this though. I feel like the dooms, everything, the sky's falling sort of people, I think are going a little bit far as far as some of the people that say, hey, we're going to win a national title next year. That's nonsense too.
Yes.
But I think when you look past some of the things that are big, like losing your starting quarterback is not ideal.
No.
Losing your top receiver is not ideal. But I think if you've watched over his 3-ish plus whatever he's at now, and he started in the middle of a pandemic. So I know we a lot of times say, that first year doesn't count, even though Mel doesn't like to say that. I think you've seen steadily the recruiting still is slowly getting better each year. I know they've had people decommit and all those sort of things, and you get a bunch of 5-stars on campus and you don't get them. But still, I think overall the recruiting has steadily been getting better. The questions you have, as Chris mentioned, are legitimate. You wonder, can they be better up front offensively? I have a feeling that that's what they're moving toward. They've got a lot of young guys I think are going to start contributing there. They did get some veterans back that are going to matter, but I think you're going to see some steady improvement there. I think defensively they've added guys. In late last season, you saw the defense get a little bit better. You start getting more of a pass rush. It's going to get a little bit better. Again, it might not be the 11 wins that fans are hoping for, and you might have some struggles at quarterback. That's a reality. You're going to be playing somebody who's hardly played, whether it's Noah Kim or Caton House or whoever. So they're going to have growing pains, right? They're going to screw stuff up, just like any young quarterback, The question is, does it cost you games? How many games does it cost you? Those sort of things, all in the kind of the overall goal of the program still moving in the right direction. I still feel like it is. Now, if we come out this fall and we see a team that can't run the ball at all, you're not seeing any of these young guys make any progress, and they're winning 3-4 games, then I think it's fair to say, where's this thing going? Yeah. But I to do that before this season, I think isn't right. But I feel like there's enough things on the surface of what we're looking at now to think you could see it starting to turn around. And Chris is right. I think it's going to be fascinating. It's a perfect. I mean, we're going to learn, I think, in this year whether you're really all in on Mel Tucker or you're starting to wonder, I don't know if we made the right call. And that might not be fair to him, but it's kind of the reality of sports now, right?
Yeah.
But
it's
I
the
think
immediacy factor.
It is.
Everything comes into it.
And it doesn't have to be wins and losses. I'm not saying you're only judging this season on they have to have X wins, and that's people will say, how many wins do you have to be I don't believe that. Yes, you want to win as many games, but if you have an 8-win, 9-win season and you won 4 games on lucky plays, and you're still not running the ball well and can't stop anybody, do you feel like your season was that much better? Or if you win 4 or 5 games, but you're in position every game to win, you're seeing those numbers go up, you're seeing the averages go up, you're seeing young guys contribute. I say to me that would be more successful because you're feeling like I'm seeing this thing getting better and going in the right direction.
It's very much like going into the 2021 season, but from a different perspective in that you looked at that season and you said, how is Mel Tucker going to make all these transfers work and blend them in and basically have 55% roster changeover from the previous year to have a success? Well, they won 11 games. This is different because a lot of those players are coming from inside the program now, and they're young, they're untested, so you aren't going to know until you see them. And it doesn't matter how many stars they had in high school, whether they had 5, 4, 1, none. There has to be cohesion with it. That's the biggest thing, is there has to be cohesion with whatever their talent is. If you can have all the talent in the world and go 3-9, you can have a team that doesn't have much talent and win 10 games. That's why I think it's fascinating. But I agree with Matt in that I do think that we're also not talking about year 2. Now you're talking about year 4, 3.5, however you want to look at it. This is more of a trajectory building type of year.
Yeah.
And it's a pivot point in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you absolutely want to see continued progress, and if you don't, that starts to be concerning 4 years in.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate the insight.
All right.
Anytime.
That's Chris Solari of the Detroit Free Press, Matt Charboneau of the Detroit News, both MSU alumni who cover Michigan State sports for Detroit's leading newspapers. And